The world of classic furniture is huge. There are literally hundreds of thousands of furniture pieces and accessories, both antique and recently made somewhere in the world. And it would be quite impossible to show you how to make everything. So what I decided to do is to give you the building blocks so you can combine them by yourself and make whatever you need for your project. So as you can see, there are all sorts of objects. Most are very ornate and decorative. Most classic furniture features some sort of wood carvings with some very nice looking ornaments. And I decided to split this series into multiple parts. And the parts are going to be the shape, the ornament, and the upholstery. And in this tutorial I'm going to cover the basic shapes. There are multiple shapes and that are quite often used with this classic furniture. So for example, you can't really do anything if you don't know how to make some good looking panels. They are all over the place for doors, sides, tops, bed frames. So I'm going to show you how to make these panels, both very simple and very ornate, like this one here for this classic door. And then we're going to look at some moldings, which are another essential part of classic furniture. They are used as crown moldings, as these little pieces in between, and the baseboard. Basically all sorts of edges that are profiled to look better can be made with these techniques. Right, and then we're gonna look at some scrolls. Scroll is a common element used for all sorts of decorative details. For example, table legs. Okay, the scrolls have different shapes. Sometimes they are used as brackets. And we're gonna see how to create something like those scrolls as well. And then we're gonna look at some turned elements or cylindrical pieces that are used as legs or decorative elements. And they are turned on a wood lathe and sometimes feature some faceted designs or decorative trim, decorative fluting, and stuff like that. Spirals. And we're gonna take a look at how to create those as well. Right, and then we're gonna look at one of the most essential elements for the classic furniture, the cabriolet leg. And this leg is used for all sorts of furniture, tables, chairs, sofas, cabinets, whatever you want. You can probably make it with these cabriolet legs. So the most basic form is pretty simple, something like that, but that can have different feet designs, like this claw and ball, this round foot, slipper, and even some animal leg design like this. And you're gonna look at some examples of how to create the legs themselves, how to connect them together to create a frame, and how to create some templates that you can easily transform and reuse for different objects. And we're also going to look at the Bombay chest, which is another common shape for classic chest of drawers. And it's a very interesting shape, looks very elegant, and it's curved in multiple directions, so it can be a bit tricky to imagine and to create. But I'm going to show you how to do that as well. Right, and in the next classic furniture series, I'm going to show you the ornaments, and after that I'm going to show you how to add the upholstery. So let's get started. I think that almost every piece of classic furniture features some sort of molding or profiled edge, and it really is a great way to make some flat boring pieces of wood much more interesting. So you can see the moldings are used for these middle separator pieces, for the baseboards, for all the framework, and here's a crown molding on top as well. So sometimes the molding profiles have some detail carvings on them, like this egg and dart profile here. But before we get to these ornament carvings, we have to figure out how to make the moldings themselves. Okay, some tabletops, baseboards, etc. So the basic idea is very simple, and the molding is made by extruding a profile along a path. 3D Max offers multiple tools to do this, and my two preferred tools are Bevel Profile Modifier. It's quite easy to use and it has a very direct approach. You can control everything about your profile directly by manipulating the profile subobject. And you have the sweep profile, which is a bit more customizable, but the workflow is slightly different. So first I'm going to show you the Bevel Profile Modifier and how I work with it. So let's say we have this path and we want to create a profile that we want to extrude along it. Let's say it goes like this. So let's say it's some sort of a tabletop or something like that. With a very elaborate profile. Okay. So you pick your path and add the Bevel Profile Modifier. Now just click the Pick Profile button and click on your profile. Okay. So looks like our profile is pointing the wrong way, and with Bevel Profile it's a very easy fix. You press 1 to activate the profile gizmo, and you can manipulate it directly. So for example, I want to rotate it to 180 degrees. If I want, I can scale it up, scale it down, and basically do whatever I want. I can offset the profile as well by moving it inwards or outwards. So it's a very easy and a very direct way to interact with your final object. And basically that's it for Bevel Profile. You have these options for capping here, which allow you to cap the gaps, and they are sometimes quite useful. Okay, and you probably want to generate the mapping coordinates as well when using this modifier. This way you can just assign some materials and render it. Okay, so the next modifier I want to show you is the sweep modifier. It works in a very similar way. You go to modifiers, select sweep, and change from the built-in section to custom section. Click pick and pick the profile. Okay, and as you can see, there is no profile gizmo for this modifier. You have to do all the adjustments with these settings here. You can mirror the profile on two planes. You can offset it as well. And you can rotate it here. So basically you can do almost everything you could do with this bevel profile modifier except for scaling. And you also have some additional options, like you can select the pivot alignment or the point on which the profile starts. So this can be sometimes useful. Okay, and to scale the profile, the only way you can do that is by selecting the original line and scaling it up. Not the line itself, but the spline subobject of it. So you can't really scale it directly by modifying the modifier. So sometimes that's a bad thing. Okay. And if you get the profile that's inverted, like this one here, you can add a normal modifier. And to close the gaps, you have to add another modifier or the cap holes modifier. So sometimes it's a bit more work, but sometimes the pivot alignment and other settings are easier to use than messing with this profile gizmo for bevel profile modifier. So the choice is up to you, really, whichever you find more comfortable. Right, and I'm going to show you another very useful thing, and it's called the sweep profile script, and it's included in the track scripts pack. So go to 3dkstudio.com/download/ and you can download the script right here. So what it does, it downloads a zip archive. You just extract the script and drag and drop it into your 3D Max viewport, and it will allow you to install it. So you don't have to do that dragging thing every time. It will install it and you can use it whenever you wish. So once you install it, you can go to customize user interface. Make sure you're at main UI and pick the category that's called track or track scripts. So the script we're interested in is the sweep profile script, and you have to assign a hotkey to it. And as you can see, I've assigned the Control-P combination to this particular script. So the way it works is you select your path, press the shortcut, and it brings up this window for the sweep profile script. And it's very simple to use. You just pick the profile that's interesting, that you're interested in. For example, let's try something like this one. And it automatically generates the geometry by using the sweep modifier. Right? And you can actually scale it directly from this sweep profile script interface. You can enter precise values as well. You can control the interpolation of the profile and the path. So it's a quite useful thing to have. And you're not really limited to these default profiles. You can actually create your own. For example, I'm going to make something like let's say something like this. Just some random profile. Okay, and once you have this profile ready, you can frame it in your viewport. This will be used to generate the screenshot, and press the Add to Library button. Okay, enter some name for this profile and press the Start button. As you can see, it was added to the list of profiles, and you can use it whenever you wish. For example, I'm going to change this profile to my test 1, and here it is. And you could use the interpolation settings to make it smoother, You can scale it and whatever. So that's a nice script and quite useful for classic furniture. Okay. So these are the basic ways to create some moldings. There are some cases when it's only viable to create the molding manually. For example, when you have to conform it to a difficult object like this one, where the surface curves in multiple directions. And in these cases it's quite difficult to use any modifiers to distort your profile correctly, or you can't really conform a spline to this object and use the sweep modifier or bevel profile modifier, as they do not work correctly in these cases. And the easiest way you can conform a profile to a shape like this is by creating the profile manually. So let's say I have to conform a rectangle like this to this shape. Okay. So the first thing you have to do is you have to create the profile, but you have to keep in mind the profile has to be made in such a way that you can turbo smooth it to create your final profile. So let's say I have a profile like this. I'm going to show you what I mean in a second. Let's attach them together. Make sure it's a nice and closed profile. Alright. So the idea is to extrude this object, modify it to fit the shape, and then I'm going to make a copy, and then you turbo smooth it. As you can see, after turbo smoothing, the profile changes like this. And that's not exactly what we want. We want to keep all these corners sharp. So you have to add some support vertices by using the refine tool. So just two vertices, one on each side of your corner. The exact distance doesn't matter, but you can use it to control how rounded the corner is going to be after smoothing. So if you want it sharp, make these vertices pretty close to the corner. And now when you have these support vertices, as you can see, after smoothing, this round part is nice and smooth, but the corners are pretty sharp. And you can modify the vertices to make sure the shape is exactly as you want it to be. Okay. So that's that. Let's get rid of this turbo smooth. And let's try to conform this profile to the shape. So the first thing I'm gonna do is make sure the profile is the correct size. So I think something like this might be appropriate. Then I'm gonna rotate it to face the surface. And I'm gonna create a corner right here by extending the vertices past the corner line and then adding a symmetry modifier. And it's easy to create a corner just by rotating the modifier like this, 45 degrees, and you have a corner. Right. And once that's done, you can collapse to editable poly. And since the subject is pretty symmetrical, we can just create 1/4 of it and use the symmetry modifiers to create the rest. But it's going to be enough to demonstrate the general principles. Okay, so I'm going to start with the highest point, which is probably around here. Then I'm going to select these parts and move them inwards like this. All right. Rotate to fit. And this one should be rotated inwards. And this one as well. And this should rotate like this. Okay. And you can add more segments by using the slice plane tool. Okay, where was it? Okay, I'm going to show you two methods. So the first one is going to be adding more segments. So just slice in some additional edge loops, bring them out, and fit to the surface. Okay, like this. And the second method is, okay, I'm just going to get rid of this thing, and the second method is delete everything beyond the endpoint and manually extrude like this. And you just extrude, and maybe I'm going to straighten it out a bit by using the FFD 2x2. Add another poly. And fit to the shape. And go forward until you meet the midpoint. Okay, it's like it's a bit too flat from the FFD 2x2. So make sure you're careful when distorting it. You can add some segments by using the connect tool as well. So there are multiple options you can use. Okay. And I'm going to extend it just past the center line. And same for this one here. Right, and now throw on some symmetry modifiers. make sure the symmetry axis is in the correct position. All right. And then you want to add the Turbo Smooth modifier. Okay, the profile is pretty good except for the corners. And to fix the corners, we have to select this edge loop. Okay, looks like something's a bit wrong. I'm just gonna get rid of those corner vertices and add them again. So, okay, so first the corner, let's chamfer it just a little bit, increase the segments to 2, and the corner is fine. And now let's add back those corners we just lost. It's easy to do afterwards if your profile doesn't have them. You can just loop the edges. It's really not a big problem. So just loop them and extrude them. Set the height to 0 and increase the width to offset them from the original corner. Okay. And that's the profile. It's like there are some tiny problems with the symmetry. Okay. So you might want to play with the threshold value if you have something like this. This happens because some of the vertices are too close together, and the symmetry modifier decides it wants to weld them together, and we don't want that, so set the threshold lower so it doesn't weld them. And you can see the profile is conformed to the surface pretty well, except maybe for this part. And you can fine-tune it if you wish. But that's the basic idea. So it is a bit of work, but sometimes it's the only way to create something like that. Next element we're going to take a look at is the scroll. It can have many different shapes. For example, here's a C scroll, shaped sort of like the letter C. Here's something like an S scroll, or similar to letter S. And there are many different variations. Okay, and many different shapes, but the basic idea is the same. It's a piece of wood. It has roughly square or rectangular cross section, and it is curved to form a nice looking pattern. In its simplest form, it's a basic flat piece cut out into this shape, and some advanced forms feature details like a decorative trim border with the scroll going in and ending with a little ball here. So it just spirals and ends with a ball. Okay, some more advanced examples include some very complicated carvings and ornaments. Okay, and sometimes it tapers a lot, starts fat and ends up skinny. But the basic principles to create them are the same. So let's start with something like this. Let's see how we would make a simple scroll with without any decorations at all. Alright, and to do this you would probably just trace it. Just trace it with a line. And use an extrude modifier or something similar. And you need to create only one half of this, as the other half can be made by mirroring this first half. And you can use the Bezier handles to easily adjust the shape. So spline modeling is really helpful in stuff like this. You can easily trace the outline if you have a nice reference photo. And try to keep the shapes smooth and flowing. Otherwise it's gonna look wrong. Okay, it's best to change these smooth areas to Bezier. And this way you will not get any creases there or any sharp transitions. Right, so once you have one half ready, you can easily mirror it, make a copy, and move to the other side. And just attach them together and well, these vertices, so there are no gaps between the two lines. Otherwise it's not gonna extrude correctly. Okay, and then just using the bevel modifier, I would first extrude it to give it some thickness, and then extrude it a little bit more to bevel the edge slightly. Okay, and finally I would give it symmetry to make the beveled edge appear on both sides. Right, so something like that. Okay, so that's the most basic example. So quite often these scrolls feature these decorative borders or outlines, and this is a bit more tricky to create. If you start with something like this, you could try edit poly, insert this polygon. Okay, so make sure you have everything correctly here. Since there's a sharp corner, it doesn't inset correctly. So you have to fix some stuff manually. Right, and you can just extrude it inwards. And you have something similar to that decorative trim or border. All that's left is chamfering the edges. I should probably have increased the interpolation steps for the original line, since it's a bit faceted over here, but I just want to demonstrate the principles of how to create something like this. Okay, so you have this decorative border here, and it works fine if it doesn't have these scrolls that go inside the shape, and if you only have a border, like for example in this photo, you only have border, no details inside. So that's something like this. However, if you do have additional details, like in this example, it becomes a bit more tricky. I'm just going to quickly change my reference image, move that to the side, and I'm going to show you how I would approach something like this. So for this first example, we used smooth lines with Bezier corners and stuff like that to get the smoothness in the curves. But now we're gonna make a rough outline and use Turbo Smooth later on to achieve a similar effect. So I'm just gonna approximate the shape. But not follow it exactly. And you have to take into account the distortion, since this is a rotated view, not a straight on shot, so take that into account. And try to recreate the shape. Let's make it a bit smoother. Okay. Let's try to rotate it and see how it looks. Maybe let's flatten this part a bit. All right. And now when we have this rough shape prepared, we can convert it to editable poly. First, check all the vertices are set to corner. Otherwise, it can cause some problems. For example, if this one is set to Bezier or something, and you convert to editable poly, You can see there are many additional vertices that we don't need. So make sure all the vertices are set to corner. And when you convert to editable poly, it has vertices only on those spots where the points used to be. Okay. So the first step would be to inset the resulting polygon a bit from the edge like this. Alright. You can press the F2 button to switch between red faces and red borders around selected faces, so it's easier to see this way. Okay, and now we can add some detail to finish these decorative scrolls. So for example, let's turn it inwards like this. Right, let's try to keep the distance equal all around. And just try to roughly approximate the shape. Okay, so let's connect some of the vertices. So like this. Make a nice mesh. And adjust the final shape manually. And this is going to become our decorative scroll. Okay, I think that might be good. And the only thing we need to fix is this part here. I'm gonna add a cut right here. And we're gonna get rid of this triangle. Okay, that's better. Let's try to smooth it out a bit. Make sure everything is nice and welded. And keep connecting the vertices to create a nice grid. So now you have something similar to a flat version of this object. At least on top, we still need to create the bottom part. Okay, so for the bottom part, it's gonna be a bit different, but the basic idea is the same. You use the cut tool to recreate the scroll. I don't do it all in one single cut, because that can cause some problems with weird overlapping polygons. So sometimes I'm stop and end my cut line on the place where I just stopped. So for example, I don't go all the way around, but I just stop here and cut over to the edge. And this can help avoiding some problems. And the idea is to make this mesh composed only from rectangles or four-sided polys, and sometimes it's not possible, so some triangles are okay. Sometimes you have some pentagons, and don't worry about it too much, since this area is not going to be deformed or animated. It's not that essential to have all quads or all four-sided polys. But whenever possible, try to stick to that number of sides. So the exact way on how to create this mesh is not fixed in any way. You can improvise just as long as the final result is something like this. Okay. Now let's connect some of these loose vertices. And we need to add some cuts here to create the sharp corner. And now just smooth the whole thing manually. Okay. Close enough. And we can check how it looks with some turbo smooth on. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these extruded details and actually extrude them outwards. Okay. I'm gonna add edit poly just so it's reversible and extrude them outwards. First just a little bit. And then a bit more. Okay, and maybe let's inset it just a little bit as well. And this will make sure the edges stay quite sharp. Okay, let's test it. Turbo smooth. Smooth it a bit more. And as you can see, we're pretty close. Maybe some details are needed here. Alright, so I'm gonna add a cut. Something very simple like this. Let's see how that looks better. And you can go over your model and okay. And adjust the overall shape a bit. Just to make sure everything is nice and round. And make sure the curves are smooth. And look good. Okay. So that's close enough. I think you can keep on tweaking the shape quite a bit more if you wish. but you get the basic idea. Alright, and once you're happy with this shape, you can go ahead and select the outline or the border and Shift plus move it inwards to extrude. Okay, first what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grow my selection and move this a bit inwards, okay, like that. And then I'm gonna select the border and extrude it more. Alright. Let's add symmetry. Move it out. Okay. And the final detail we need to add is we need to go above the symmetry, add edit poly, and just select this edge ring, control click here on the polygons to convert your selection, and we want to extrude this thing inwards. Make sure you set it to local normals so the extrusion goes correctly. Okay, like that. Accept and inset just a little bit. And there's your scroll. So the process is a bit complicated, but the end result is a single object with correct geometry. And it looks quite good. So there is one more way you can do this. You can start with the basic shape. I'm just gonna quickly demonstrate to you. Okay. Instead of tracing, I'm just gonna copy a shape from this part. Okay, so let's say you traced the outline with smooth shape, smooth curve, then you extrude it, or bevel it, or whatever. In this case, extrude is good enough since you won't see the edge anyways. Okay, let's make sure it's smooth. Okay, and you have this basic rough piece. And what you can do is, instead of creating this grid and making this object as a single piece, you can add a basic line on top of it. It might be a bit easier to create. So I'm just roughly tracing the outline. Just to show you the general idea. Alright, like that. And what I want to do is, okay, just let's finish it up here first. Okay, let's say that's our decorative extruded line. So what I want to do is enable it in render and viewport, change it to rectangular, and increase the width and height to something like this. And I want to go ahead and add edit poly straight away. And add turbo smooth as well. Okay. So that's our starting point. And it can be a bit easier to create this than this other version here. But it will not be as high quality as that one. Okay, so let's add a crease here. Let's add a crease there. Actually, let's attach these together. Like this. I just deleted these and polygons, as you can see here. And now I can target weld to close the gaps. Okay. And the thing we need to add is this circular part in the center or the end of the scroll, or scroll head as it's called. And to do that, I'm just gonna add some edge loops. And adjust the shape. Alright, so it's roughly something like this. As you can see, it's pretty close. And same thing on this end. Just need to add some geometry and change it into a round shape. Okay. And finally we need to fix this part. And now we can be a bit lazy and just delete these end polys. And leave it like that. Okay, so right now this trim is circular or round in cross section, and we want to change it to rectangular or square, and we can do that by chamfering these long edges. Just select some of these long edges and loop the selection like this. Okay, you need to add some Right. And looks like there's a problem over here. We have this diagonal edge, which I'm gonna have to remove. Okay. And I'm gonna reselect my long loops. Like that. And finally just chamfer them. And you can control the exact amount of sharpness in these corners. Let's say I want to have them like this. Okay, there's a problem over here, and that's because there's a triangular section, and we can fix it easily by using some basic poly modeling tools. I'm just gonna remove this part and this one and collapse these two edges. And that fixes it. And same on the opposite corner. Just fix the mesh so it's nice and the flow is not interrupted. Okay, like that. And as you can see, the end result is quite similar to this first version, and perhaps this one is easier to create. So choose whichever you want, they both work. And this one is a bit more flexible, more realistic. Right. So sometimes these scrolls have additional details, for example. Okay, this one's a bad example. All right, here we have these details on the inner edges or this flat surface. So we have a flat surface here. I'm going to show you how to add some detail to that. Okay, so we made a copy. I'm going to collapse to editable poly. First I'm going to get rid of these sides, and basically what you do is you select this edge ring, add some loops, maybe pinch it out a bit, and then you can use poly modeling tools to add some detail. For example, I'm going to extrude this part inwards, like this, and I want to select these two loops and chamfer them so they are hard edges. Okay, and I'm going to turn on Turbo Smooth to show you the result, and it has this nice trim. And let's add a bead running along the center. Okay, first I'm gonna extrude this loop just to control the overall shape, and then I'm gonna extrude it again, but this time outwards. Okay. And finally, let's chamfer it a bit. Right. And to make sure these two edge loops are crisp and hard, we can use the extrude again and just slightly extrude them inwards. Okay, and now we have a nice bead in the center, and we have given the center part a nice profile. And finally, I'm gonna throw on cap holes modifier on top of my turbo smooth. If you would use in this object, you do not need to delete any faces or use the cap holes modifier. You can just edit this part directly, and it's gonna be fine after turbo smoothing. For this one we needed these steps because extruded geometry doesn't have correct mesh on the top and bottom, so we just deleted it and added another cap after modifying the object itself. Otherwise, if you just turbo smooth this thing, you could get something like this, which is not really usable. So it's easier to delete dents, make adjustments, add turbo smooth, and then add the caps back. Right, so that's about it for scrolls. Quite often there are cylindrical elements turned on a wood lathe used in classic furniture. So you can see some examples here. Mostly they are used as legs for chairs, tables, sofas, cabinets, etc. So here's a pretty simple example. It started probably with a square blank. Turn the profile over here and here, and that's basically it. No decorative carvings, no any other details, just basic turning on a lathe. Sometimes on classic furniture there are some added details like fluting over here. You can see these recesses around the leg. And that's also pretty simple to make. Here's another example with fluted legs. Sometimes you have to use some advanced techniques to create elements like spirals or different carvings on top of the cylindrical leg. Okay, these spirals can sometimes be in the form of fluting. So this can also be a bit tricky to create in 3D Max, but I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, so basically the variations of this style are limitless, but you have to know some basic principles on how to approach modeling something like this. Okay, so the first thing you have to know how to do is how to create a basic turned profile. And the easiest way to do that is by using the lathe modifier. I'm just going to quickly draw a profile line, and I'm going to revolve it around its axis to create my object. Usually if you're modeling something specific, you can just put your photo as the viewport background and trace the lines from that. I'm just going to create a random profile here. And once you'll have the profile ready, you can create the 3D shape by using the lathe modifier. Alright. And as you can see, the axis of of the lathe is offset, you can go and activate the sub-object by pressing 1 or selecting it here in the modifier list. And you can move it until you have the center in the correct place. Alright, if the proportions look wrong, you can easily turn on the preview and adjust the points until you have something more natural looking. So let's say we have a leg like this. Okay, that may be a bit too thick on top. Alright. And there's our leg. So this is the most basic thing you can create. Make sure you increase the segments to a larger number until you get a smooth result. And it's probably a good idea to chamfer these vertices over here that are sharp. Okay, that's just one of them. Don't have any more on this model. And I'm just going to chamfer it, and the edge looks much more natural now. Right? Okay, so that's the basic method of creating a lathe turned object with 3D Max. So how do we create something that is segmented? Like this, for example. Let's say we want some 8 segments. Well, there are a few methods. One of them is still using the lathe, but reducing the number of segments to the correct number you need. Okay, so maybe let's try 8 or 6 to see the effect better. And as you can see, the result looks a bit weird since we have these smoothing issues here. But you can just turn off the smooth option of the lathe modifier. Add edit poly. And I want to chamfer these long edge loops, just to make them look more natural. Right. And now to make the whole thing smooth, add a smooth modifier and enable the auto smooth option. Okay, and that's the segmented version of the same model. So again, that's pretty simple to create and easily adjustable. Alright. If you want to add some decorative details, like here for example, this can be a bit more tricky, and what I recommend is making a copy first, and it's much easier to just adjust one of the segments and make the rest created automatically. So you can do that by first centering the pivot point to the center of the object. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an edit poly modifier. I'm going to select these polys, expand the selection until I get to the midpoint of the seam, like this. Press Ctrl I to invert my selection, and I'm just going to get rid of everything else. So all that's left is this one segment. And now I can easily modify it. For example, let's make an inset over here. Okay. And let's extrude it inwards. And chamfer this outer edge. Right. So let's say it looks good and you want to create the rest of the parts and the rest of the sides. So you just go to Tools, Array, set it to rotate on the Z-axis a total of 360 degrees, and set the number of segments or copies to 6. Press Preview, see how it looks. Make sure it's set to instance. Press OK. And you have the rest of the segments created automatically. Now let's say I decided I want to add some more detail here. I'm just going to add another edit poly, just in case. Insert it like this and extrude inwards. Right. And finally, let's load the selection and chamfer this edge. Okay, looks good. Let's smooth it. And let's say we are happy with our changes and we want to attach these parts back together. And that's also easy to do. Just isolate your selection, convert everything to editable poly, and attach together. Right. And you can make sure it's not broken into elements by selecting all the vertices and welding them at 0.01. Basically the smallest possible value you can choose. And now when you select elements, it's one element. There are no seams, no splits. All right. And that's a simple but useful technique to use on segmented turnings that you need to adjust multiple parts of simultaneously. It gets really helpful when you have more pieces than 6. For example, you have almost round with 60 pieces and you need to adjust just one slice or 2 slices of that, and you can do that. You just have to calculate how many copies to use with the array tool. Right, now I'm going to show you how to add some fluting to this model. Let's start with a copy, collapse it to editable poly. And there's a very useful extended primitive in 3D Max. It's called the capsule. And you can just create something like a capsule. Rotate it like this. Collapse to editable poly and extend down over here. Maybe let's taper it a little bit. Let's make this part a bit smaller on the bottom. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the Pro Boolean tool to just cut out the shape from our original leg. First, we need to make some copies. Again, that's easy to do. First thing you have to do is center your pivot point on the leg. So I'm just going to do it manually, or you can use the align tool for that as well. Okay, and then use the array tool and set up the number of segments you want to cut out, or the fluting. Okay, you can use the preview to see how it looks. Maybe let's increase it one more. Okay, 2 more. That's good. Collapse to editable poly. And just using the compound objects pro boolean, you can easily pick those out like this. And the result looks pretty good. Well, the mesh is very hard to edit afterwards, but sometimes it doesn't matter, so what I recommend is doing this step as the last step only, when you have the model completely ready and just need to add the fluting. That's when you would probably use pro boolean. Okay, and just to get rid of these weird smoothing issues, I'm gonna add an edge loop here with my slice plane tool. And you can see these edges going here in different directions, and when I move the slice plane down, you can see that it becomes much less visible. And you can do the same part, the same thing on the bottom part, but it's pretty tiny over there, so it's probably wouldn't be too visible anyways. Right. And the nice thing about booleans is that once you do the boolean operation and add an edit poly modifier, the thing you have selected is the border of the cut. So this can be pretty useful if you want to try and chamfer the newly created edges. Most of the time I find it's not necessary, since these edges tend to be pretty hard in real life as well, but you can try to chamfer them slightly if you wish. Okay, just a little bit. Alright, so that's how you add the fluting. And now I'm going to show you how to add the square elements you have here. And at the first glance it looks pretty simple, just create a box or something. And sometimes it really is that simple, but in this case it's a bit more tricky. You have a box, but the corners are rounded. Okay, so let's say we start with a box. And we want to round the corners. And you have a couple of options here. So first one I'm going to show you is by using the FFD modifier. This is not an exact method and the results will not be perfect, but it can be pretty quick to use. So what you do is you want to add more segments like this, and some segments across them as well. And then you add an edit poly modifier. Let's say we're gonna round this part. So we select these vertices and add the FFD modifier, FFD 3x3x3. The reason we selected these vertices is that we want the FFD modifier to work only on them and leave the rest of the object alone. And I'm just gonna select these center points, basically all the points except the corners. I'm just gonna move them up like this. And it's a pretty quick way to get a similar looking result as you have in this example, but it's not really perfect, and in real life it looks a bit different. To get a perfect result you need to use the Boolean tools again. Right, and the other method I want to show you is a bit more accurate. I'm just going to copy this over here, get rid of my modifiers. And let's reduce the segments back to 1. And what I want to do is I want to rotate the box 45 degrees So the widest part is facing directly towards me. As you can see, as you rotate, this is the widest it can get. Right, and then you take a line tool and make a profile for a nice rounded cut. It's something pretty simple like this. Okay, good. Move the pivot points to center of the box. Okay. And using the lathe modifier, you can get a result like this. Okay, set the segments pretty high. Okay, 64 will work. Make sure your line has enough interpolation steps. I'm going to increase them to 32, so the final result is very smooth. And now I'm just going to collapse these both objects to editable polys. And using Pro Boolean, I'm going to make a cut and cut off everything outside this rounded line. So make sure it's set to the subtraction mode. I click Start Picking and pick your lathed profile. And there's your result. And this is probably a much more accurate representation of what you would get on a real wood turning lathe. And to make the other half, you just use the symmetry modifier. Or if the other half is a different profile, you create another profile and cut it off with the Boolean tools. And as you can see, they are a bit similar in look, but pretty different at the same time. Okay, and to get rid of these hard edges, you can simply use V-Ray Edges texture in the bump slot on your material or something like that. Since these Boolean objects are pretty hard to modify with poly modeling tools. You can try adding Edit Poly. Selecting the edges, it already has the borders selected, but it's a bit tricky to chamfer them, and you probably get some glitches if you try. First of all, the results are not too even. But if you use a pretty low value, it might be okay. So yeah, with a very small value, you can do it like this as well. If you want a larger chamfer, you have to go in manually, and that's a bit tricky. Then you would probably use a low resolution profile and edit the resulting mesh manually to add some support edges and stuff like that. But most of the time, these edges are pretty sharp, so this works well, and it's pretty quick as well. Right. So let's look at some spiral elements. Spirals can be a bit difficult to make. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and create something like this. Right, so let's set up our background. And here we go. Okay. So to make a spiral, I would probably do it like this. I would create a single twist. And for that you can use the helix tool. Okay, let's rotate it vertically and adjust the parameters manually. Make sure the radius is set to the same value for 1 and 2, and set the height and the number of turns. Okay. So it looks like something like this might be accurate. Right, let's convert to editable spline. And since you can't really control the interpolation steps on the helix, and that's one negative side of this tool, you have to go in manually and reduce the number of segments like this. I'm just selecting every other point. And deleting them. Okay. And you can give it a profile. Let's try a larger thickness. Maybe a bit more, like this. And I'm going to select the line and slightly scale it down. From the top view. Okay, that's pretty close, I think. All right. Now just let's make some copies. Okay. You could make the whole thing in one step with the helix by adjusting the turns and the height and radius, but maybe this is a bit easier to control the precise size of one turn. And then just attach them together. And select all vertices and let's weld them with a pretty low value. Make sure they are all set to corner. Okay, so here's the result. Looks pretty close. All we have to do now is fix this part over here. And we can try to do that manually with Edit Poly. Okay. Let's move it down. Scale it like this. Basically try to smooth out the transition. Okay. And you can chamfer this one. Like this. Select all the vertices and weld them at 0.1. And maybe chamfer this edge as well. And weld the vertices again. Okay, so that's pretty smooth. You can spend some time tweaking the shape if you wish, or you can leave it like it is. Okay, and same thing for the top part. And then just use the technique we saw earlier for this box, and this profile could be created with a simple profile with lathe modifier. Okay, so the helix tool is pretty useful for these spirals. Okay, so next thing I want to show you is how to create some fluted cuts like this here. Let's start with this, same like we used before. The first thing we want to do is we want to twist it. But to twist it successfully, we need to add some segments over here. So right now, if you add edit poly and try to twist it, you can see that it messes up the object and the result is pretty bad. But if you add some segments here, you can add the twist modifier, set the correct axis, okay, first let's center the pivot point. And then let's try the twist modifier again. And as you can see, it twists pretty well. So what I would do next is I would add another edit poly, select one of the edge loops, and deselect these top and bottom parts. And create a line from this. So create shape, set it to linear. Enable in viewport and renderer. Maybe let's set it rectangular. Set it to 2 by 2. And add a turbo smooth modifier. Okay. Now let's make some copies with the array tool. And that's way too much. Okay, like this. Make sure they're set to instances. And I'm going to reduce the radius a bit. Okay. Let's isolate one of them and look at how exactly it looks. So we need to fix the ends with edit poly modifier. So let's remove this diagonal here and add another edge ring here by using the connect tool. And now when you add turbo smooth, you can see it's nice and rounded over here. And it's a bit too stretched out on this end, so I'm gonna add an edge ring here or edge loop here. Okay, like this. Right, let's isolate it, convert to editable poly. And add, and go to compound objects, pro boolean, and just pick these off like here, like I'm doing right now. Okay, so you can make some fluted spirals like this. Alright, so another thing you can do is I'm gonna make a copy and show you. Okay, let's take this one out. And collapse back to editable poly. And another thing you can do is simply select these lines, loop them, and edit them directly. For example, I want to make this into some little cuts. Okay, like that. Let's ring and chamfer. And finally smooth. And you can get some interesting effects this way as well. Or if you wish, you can make an outwards extrusions as well. It's also very simple. Just select this ring and extrude outwards. Okay, I'm going to increase the width to maximum and finally chamfer it also to maximum and increase the segments to make some nice rounded shapes. Okay, let's weld at 0.01 or actually even 0 is enough. Add another smooth modifier. And there you have it. So you can use all sorts of different techniques on twisted objects. All right. Okay, so for more detailed work, you can do it like this. I'm gonna make another copy of this object. And right now our original profile is very smooth. And what I want to do is I want to make it less smooth. So I'm gonna add some extra vertices here. So let's divide this in 2. Let's divide this in maybe 4. Again, this in 2. And these probably are enough with one division. Okay, and set all the vertices to corner type. And now, after using the light modifier, you have this rough result. For it to work correctly, you need to add some support vertices around the corners you want to keep hard after delete modifier. So a couple of support vertices here, here, and here as well. Okay, that's a bit weird, but alright. Again, just add some vertices everywhere you want hard edges after the lathe and turbo smooth modifiers. Just go over it quickly. Okay, and here's the result. You can see it's a pretty low res mesh, especially if you decrease the segments, for example. Let's set them to 16. And what you can do next is add an edit poly modifier. Add a turbo smooth modifier. And after turbo smooth, it looks pretty similar to this original, with one exception. This version is much more editable than this one, but the end result looks pretty similar. And I'm going to show you what you can do with this more advanced version. Okay, so first let's center the pivot point. Okay, good. And now let's collapse to editable poly. Select these polygons, press Ctrl I to invert and delete everything. Now we have this one little segment. Alright. Now using the array tool, we're gonna recreate the rest of the object. So we need 8 copies, since we have 2 segments here and we had 16 originally. Okay, looks like we need 16, sorry about that. Oh yeah, that's after turbo smooth, my mistake, sorry. Now let's get rid of that turbo smooth. And now collapsed editable poly. Sorry about that. Forgot I had turbo smooth on it. Okay, so select 2 segments, press Ctrl I. First, let's make sure the pivot is centered. Okay, so it's centered. And delete all these other polys. Okay, now you have this rough segment left. Alright. Now when you use the array tool, you only need 8. And that's fine. Okay. Good. Right, and now what you can do is you can edit these pretty extensively. For example, I'm gonna add an edit poly modifier. And let's say I want some additional detail here. I'm gonna chamfer it first. And then I'm going to select these polys and bevel them inwards. Okay, and maybe collapse them as well. And chamfer this resulting border. Okay. So what else? Maybe let's Let's add another detail here. Maybe something a bit similar to, okay, where was it? Maybe something similar to this part, but not exactly, but the same basic idea. So let's bevel it. Maybe rotate a bit. And let's add an edge loop along the outer perimeter over here. Alright, like this. And finally, let's try to extrude this inwards. Okay. Looks like some of my settings are a bit wrong here. Looks like I messed up something here. Okay. Alright, and let's chamfer this. Okay, and now we have all these details added to the model. We can isolate it, collapse to editable poly, and attach it back together. Select all the vertices, weld them, 0.01. And try on Turbo Smooth. And you have these bulbs here, these little circular cuts here, and these little vertical cuts over here. And as you can see, it's a pretty flexible method for adding some detail to segmented objects. Okay, so I think that's about it for turned objects.